welcome to this edition of CIBER Focus. I'm Sara Reeves, and with me today is Sam Daley-Harris, the founder of Results, also the Microcredit Summit campaign, and more recently, the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation. Mr. Daley-Harris is here on campus thanks to the Kelley Institute for Social Impact and the Center for the Study of Global Change. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
So the first thing I want to talk to you about is your long-term passion for ending global poverty, which is a pretty big goal. And I'm curious how you found this course in your life. I know you started out a musician, and now you're campaigning to end global poverty was a big thing that you've been working on. How did that become such a big part of your life?
Yes, well, you could say that I had this long-term passion for hopelessness, and then that shifted. And a lot of times people would say, well, wait, you were a musician and then you started a lobby on ending poverty. What motivated that change? And when I look back in my life, I graduated high school in '64, and I learned at the ceremony that a high school fraternity brother a year younger had died the day before in a tractor-trailer accident. And it was like one of those moments where you're 17 and you think you have forever, and all of a sudden with the funeral and the mourning period, you realize you don't necessarily. And the questions of purpose, why am I here? What am I here to do? 4 years later, '68, Robert Kennedy is assassinated around college graduation day. And again, no answers, but the questions, why am I here? What am I here to do? Come up loud and clear. 9 years later, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger, the Hunger Project. I never really thought about it much. I was kind of oblivious, but if I thought about it, I would think, well, it's inevitable because there are no solutions, because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. I consider myself really ordinary in that regard. Yet I went to this lecture, found out there's no mystery to growing food or accessing clean water, basic health. I wasn't hopeless, as I thought, about the lack of solutions. I was hopeless about human nature, that people would just never get around to doing the things that could be done. But there was one human nature I had some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? So I got involved, and this kind of leads to the kernel of this starting of this organization, Results. I talked to 7,000 high school students in 1978 and 1979 and read some statements from the National Academy of Sciences Food Nutrition Study calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you met him. I don't want to know if you wrote him. Just the name. Out of 7,000, 200 knew, fewer than 3%. 6,800 didn't know the name, more than 97%. And Results started out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington. So it was quite a journey from some legitimate and serious hopelessness, then eventually into action.
And this action is on a very big problem. And you were talking about hopelessness, and a lot of people don't think this is a solvable problem.
Right.
But you've had been working to. What were the things that you were doing that you
Well, let me give you a couple of quick examples. In 1984, we started lobbying on what UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, called child survival issues. 5 million kids were dying every year from vaccine-preventable diseases like measles, coupled with malnutrition, et cetera. And their estimate then was that 41,000 children were dying every day from largely preventable malnutrition and disease. And we lobbied that year and year in and year out and decade in and decade out. And the latest statistic from UNICEF is the 41,000 deaths a day from mostly preventable things has gone to 18,000 a day. Now, you could say, well, that's still scandalously high, but it's clearly going in the right direction. And that doesn't just happen in the course of life itself. There's some advocacy involved. There was some pressure. When we lobbied, when we started, there was zero funding for Child Survival Fund. Now, child survival and maternal health have gone from about 0 to 600 million a year just in bilateral programs. So we see that kind of change. Let me give you two other more quickly. 1 million microloans in 1986. Now it's more like 125 million people with a microloan. 150 million kids elementary school age not in school in the mid-'80s. Now it's closer to 58 million not in school. Still scandalously high, but these are all going in the right direction, and they're going that way because people kind of dropped their hopelessness, found a structure of support that could really empower them, and then got into action.
Now that's been a long-term project, and those are dramatic changes
Yes.
over that period of time.
Right.
Recently, the World Bank has announced that they believe they can end global poverty by 2030. So we're looking in a 20-year time frame here. Do you think that this is possible, given your experience and the amount of change you've seen?
Well, given my experience, it's absolutely possible. Is it, are we sure we're going to get there? No, not at all, because of the same kind of hopelessness and apathy. In other words, it's thrilling to me as an advocate that the World Bank President Jim Kim would set the World Bank sights on ending extreme poverty by 2030. That's thrilling. And yet, you know, I still know that it's not going to come just because he said so, or even the World Bank said so. It's going to come because more and more people, you know, saw it as part of the mission of their lives. There's this quote I love from Mark Twain. He said, "The two most important days of your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why." And I think part of the why is, you know, we're here to matter, to make a difference, to leave the campsite cleaner than we found it. And these kinds of issues, not global poverty only, but there's an array of issues that allow us to answer the why on a national and global scale, not just answer it with our family or our neighborhood or maybe just our community.
You had mentioned one of the things that you had done working on this was related to microcredit, and you were also the founder of the Microcredit Summit campaign.
Right.
And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about why you were such a big supporter of microcredit and an early supporter. And I believe that there's a quote from Muhammad Yunus talking about results being one of the biggest supporters
Right.
of this idea.
Right.
So I'm curious what it is about that you saw as a solution.
Well, let me say it two ways. One reason is because we entered the field of microfinance through the Grameen Bank. And this was 1985. And so if you enter through Grameen Bank, you see transformation. I mean, not every time, not with every client. To be honest, this field of microfinance has hit long ago a fork in the road. And one fork in the road asks this question: what more can we do to improve the well-being of our clients? Oh, they need basic health, how can we bring that in? Or their kids aren't in school, how can we deal with that? The other fork in the road asks this question: what more can we do for the health of our investors? So this field, which I started out very excited about, and I still am, has some prongs that I'm less excited about and have less to do with the end of poverty and more to do with making a profit, in a sense, from the poor.
So what are the things that you're seeing on the horizon, that maybe the next solution? What is it that's possible that the World Bank is seeing as well, that they think that poverty can end? Are there things out there that you're excited about?
Well, I mean, there's always just doable things. I mean, kids are still dying of preventable malnutrition and disease. Kids are still not in elementary school. I mean, these are not complicated things in terms of we don't know what to do about these kinds of issues. So there's always the doable kind of piece. I think it's also exciting to hear Muhammad Yunus speak about his new passion, social business, nonprofit, non-loss. He tells this story about he was going to speak at some university near Paris, and he got a call that the head of Danone Yogurt, which is headquartered in France, wants to meet him for lunch. And they met for lunch. He said, "Tell me about Danone, tell me about Grameen Bank." He said, "What can we do together?" And Yunus said, "Well, maybe we could start a social business where it would be a nonprofit, non-loss business. You could put in money to get it started and get that money back, but no dividend. The dividend goes back to the social good. And a company that created a yogurt, nutritional yogurt for malnourished kids, low cost, that would be very valuable. Mm-hmm. The chairman of Danone stands up, sticks out his hands. He said, well, in your book, you say you do things with a handshake, not a lawyer. Okay, so and Eunice said, well, but I'm not sure you understood. It's a nonprofit, non-loss business. You put the investment in, get it back, but no dividend. The head of Danone stands up. So Eunice says, I get in the car. I said, maybe my Bangladeshi English and his French English. He sends him an email saying, I wanted to make sure you were clear that this is a nonprofit, non-loss. And he writes back, yes, I understand completely. Well, they decide they need €500,000 mm-hmm. to launch this small piece. And the lawyers at Danone says, you can't invest company money in a company that you know you will get no dividend from. Mm-hmm. So they invite the investors of Danone to give a little piece of their dividend. They needed €500,000. Well, the investors put in €15 million. And then the staff of Danone got upset. You let the investors put in money. You didn't let the staff. The staff put in another 15 million. They had 30 million euros needed, €500,000. I mean, this kind of story, it gives you a sense of a different vision for business, international business, and business that does good in the world, as Eunice would call it.
It's interesting to me that the power of this story is the individual, that the company itself wasn't able to do it, but that they could ask their investors and their staff. And I think that that's something that's been very key in your work, is empowering the individual.
Yes, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your new center?
Well, the center basically says this. Most non-governmental organizations ask their stakeholders, their donors, for not much more than a click mm-hmm. and a check. Mm-hmm. And what the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation says is, look, you've got 500,000 members or 2 million or whatever. Could you see being trained to find and train that small portion of your members who want to go deep mm-hmm. With their advocacy? To create champions in Congress and the media for your cause. And so it's a little bit of a tough sell at the beginning because people are comfortable with mouse clicks and with check writing requests.
I can see that. Would there be concern that this would affect the check writing?
Well, there could be. It shouldn't be. I mean, it should see their overall mission as to whatever it is on climate change or global poverty. I started coaching a group 6 years ago, didn't exist 6 years ago, Citizens Climate Lobby. This is the first action of the center. They have 131 chapters in the US and Canada now, up from 0 6 years ago. And in the first 9 months of 2013, their volunteers have had 873 letters to the editor published, 153 op-eds published, and they've had 639 meetings with members of Congress or their staff, all on their issue, which is a tax on carbon rebated to the public, which is a tough mountain to climb. But, it's way beyond a mouse click petition. Paul Loeb, who wrote The Soul of a Citizen, told me this year, well, those mouse click petitions to Congress, they're counted, but they're also discounted. And my message is don't stop the mouse click, but don't stop there is the other part of it.
And you're with us on campus today, partially because you're talking about your new book.
Yes.
Reclaiming Our Democracy.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what you're talking about in your...
Well, oversimplified, the thrust of it is most people feel despair about solving big problems they care about. That despair is unwarranted. And the book is basically filled with examples of that. Maybe I could give you one right now.
Great.
One of the chapters, the new chapters, is on this group, Citizen Climate Lobby. And there's a woman in it who said, I started with Citizen Climate Lobby and I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book Earth, and I would weep at home, and I would weep at work. And then I joined Citizen Climate Lobby, and 18 months later, I was co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and your editorial writer. And she got on their conference call, there's a monthly conference call, after the conference a year ago, and she said, you know, our executive director said, we're betting the farm on relationships. Not we're betting it on mouse clicks or phone messages to the switchboard. We're betting the farm on relationship. Then he tells us to go get a relationship with our member of Congress and an editorial writer. We don't know, we've not done that before. I needed a model. Some people use like the work relationship as a model. I adore romance, so I use romantic relationships as my model. You know that first meeting with the editorial writer? It's like a blind date, only you've decided ahead of time you're going to marry this fellow. If it doesn't work out with the editorial writer, you'll marry one of his friends at the paper, science writer, business writer. Somebody is going to find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of persistence. And she goes through this amazing rap, and I want to just read the last part. On the last day of the conference, she met with 20 congressional offices with others, all the congressional offices from Virginia, where she's from. Her congressman is Eric Cantor, and their paper is the Richmond Times-Dispatch. This is what she says at the end. During our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart towards them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change, my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work, end of quote. Well, most people would say, no. Meeting with 20 congressional offices, this is dirty and hopeless work. And we need to get ourselves to where she got, to where this is sacred and profound work.
Interesting. I don't think I'd considered it quite that way before.
Well, you're not alone, actually.
I'm trying to think of what a good follow-up question is, because I'm a little stumbled there.
Did she fluster you?
Yeah. So what's next? Where are you going to go now that you've started the center, you've worked to end world poverty, you have a book? What's happening next with you?
Well, I mean, oversimplified, it's really convincing organizations to offer more to their stakeholders than kindergarten when it comes to civic empowerment. So that's my gig now, because people want to do something, but they feel, but they're not offered much in the way of a structure of support that can take them from kindergarten to 3rd and 5th and 9th and 12th and really into college as a citizen activist. There's this quote from Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert, who said, "We aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth, we're the crew. We aren't residents on this planet, we're citizens. The difference in both cases is responsibility." And I used to say, in the mid-'80s, when we were really getting going, we would begin to get up out of our passenger seats and walk up to the cockpit and notice there's nobody up there, kind of thing. And so citizens need to really educate themselves and move into action.
And since our focus is, for CIBER, is the business focus, when you talk about citizen, it's very popular right now for businesses to talk about being good corporate citizens. Do you see a role for business as well as the individual in these efforts?
Well, absolutely. I mean, a billion people living on less than $1 a day is not good for business. A changing climate with really unpredictable weather systems is not good for business. I'm coaching another group, the Peace Alliance. Conflict, armed conflict, none of this stuff is good for business. And so, you know, a business leader needs to see beyond the quarterly report into the future and how this can change. And people can go to groups like results.org or citizensclimatelobby.org or thepeacealliance.org and find a connection to this structure of support that I see is so needed.
So what is your parting message that you would want to share with anyone who's watching our Cyber Focus interview?
I would point them to a page in one of the new chapters where on one side of the page is a little circle that's labeled your comfort zone, and to the right is a much larger circle that's labeled where the magic happens. The magic of seeing your vision is expressed in the media and with your member of Congress's action, and find an organization that really empowers you in moving from your comfort zone over to where the magic happens.
Is there any overlap in that Venn diagram?
Well, you know, there's a moment of overlap, but it actually, where the magic happens, that's now your comfort zone. So there's a new where the magic happens just outside of that. And I think pay attention to the quote attributed to Anonymous, be outrageous. It's the only place that isn't crowded. And, you know, taking a stand as a citizen and finding one of these groups like Citizen Climate Lobby, Results, the Peace Alliance, would be a start toward, even if you're just going there to learn their methodology and steal it and take it to another issue you care about, I think it'd be a powerful action.
That's great advice.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And also I would like to thank the Kelley Institute for Social Impact and the Center for the Study of Global Change for bringing you to campus today. That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. If you have any questions or suggestions for future interviews, you can always reach us at ciber@indiana.edu. Thank you.